Children of the Whales is an anime adaptation of a manga written by Umida Abi, originally airing in the fall season of 2017. Much of the staff working on the show shares the creative individuals who worked on the divisive 2016 anime adaptation of Occultic 9, such as its director, Ishiguro Kyohei. What has changed here is the addition of scriptwriter Yokote Michiko, known for emotional and compelling scenarios that elevated works such as the original Dot Hack anime and Cowboy Bebop, and she also did a lot of really great shoujo titles as well. In my opinion, as someone who found a lot of value in Occultic 9, but was turned off by the hectic pacing and totally unrelatable characters, many of the mistakes that anime committed are remedied here in this adaptation, and make for a stellar and infinitely compelling narrative that captivated me from the very first minute through to its fantastic conclusion. It is a blend of science fiction and fantasy that moves its plot forward with emotional and dramatic peaks and valleys. It's this fantastic world taking place across a vast, endless sea of sand, and upon this sea sails the island known as the Mud Whale. The Mud Whale is this floating island, this landmass, this being that a small naturalistic society inhabits in total harmony. As the Mud Whale drifts directionlessly across the sea of sand, as its children have no means to control it or to change its course, the inhabitants live out an unchanging existence across predictable natural cycles, while although beautiful, are completely unchanging. They do not know war, they do not know conflict, yet they live without any expansive history. They do not know the origins of the Mud Whale, nor the origins of their own people. They don't know where they came from, if anywhere else, if mainlands exist, or if any other human beings exist, as they have never met human beings who weren't born on their island. The children of the Mud Whale are separated into two groups, 9 out of 10 of them as being designated as marked at birth. Designated as such due to their natural ability to control a telekinetic power that they have named Thymia. Those that are marked are both blessed and cursed, as they experienced very shortened lifespans, dying of exhaustion by the time they reach their late teens or early 20s. The other group of people who inhabit the Mud Whale are known as the unmarked, individuals who were not born with the blessing and curse of controlling Thymia at all. These individuals are able to experience normal lifespans going into their 60s and 70s and beyond, where those of elderly age take up their positions as the governing class of the Mud Whale, working to utilize their obtained wisdom to govern, direct, and protect the order of their small society. Yet, there is another way in which I think you can divide the children of the Mud Whale. Life on this island is considered a utopia. There are those who believe in this fact, and despite the daily tragedy of the marked population dying far too young, they see no need to question the mysteries of their own existence. Why do so, when they live in perfect harmony and comfort with their island? So then, there are those too who harbor dissatisfaction with this supposedly utopian way of life. They refuse to accept the deaths of the marked around them, and they refute their solitary existence on this island, and dream of what life is like beyond the Mud Whale, what life could be like beyond the sea of sand, if such a thing could exist. The narrative is driven by 3 individuals who refute this utopia. Chakuro, a young boy designated as marked, who was given the task of chronicling the lives of those around him. He is passionate and empathetic to the lives of his kin, the lives of the young. He believes that through recording their thoughts and feelings, that he can preserve their fleeting lives, that he can give an importance to the individuals whom life and circumstance would rather fade away like grains of sand. Then there's Suo, an unmarked young man who is entering his adulthood and preparing himself to succeed the previous mayor of the Mud Whale. He is stoic and driven and is highly empathetic towards the marked people around him and the curse that afflicts them. He works tirelessly, researching ways to lengthen their short lifespans. He works to honor them and to remember them, and allows for their voices to be heard, often questioning the very elders that he is set to follow. And then there is Oni, an outcast, a rebel with exceptional Thymia power. On the Mud Whale, aggression and conflict is highly prohibited, and so he was frequently sent to the Mud Whale's prison, behind bars deep in the core of the island, to keep him away from the peaceful inhabitants. Over time, Oni chose to simply remain in the prison, to remain in his cage, saying that his prison cell is no different from the prison that they all willingly choose to stay in while on the Mud Whale. He dreams of a better life. He dreams of true freedom and of a life free from the Mud Whale, free from the sea of sand. The children of the Mud Whale continue their cyclical lives, drifting aimlessly on the sea of sand, until one day they discover another island, much like their own, and upon investigating that island, they meet another human being for the very first time. Children of the Whales is beautiful. It's gorgeous. The animation is beautiful. I was so blown away by the color design. I was so blown away by the way that color is used in the show. The painterly backgrounds, the eccentric character designs, the vibrancy of the world, and what pairs so beautifully and, to be honest, exquisitely with that is the music. I found the music to be very engaging. I found the music to be exquisite in terms of the compositions. I found it very emotionally evocative. And I found that the way that the music was used throughout the show was very punctuating, and it was very powerful and very moving. But I think what I was most surprised by was actually the writing of the show. I was very impressed by the show's pacing. And of course, these are all my own subjective thoughts, because I get the impression definitely that my opinion is not shared unanimously among a lot of anime fans who have watched this show. But I'm here on my own YouTube channel, and god damn it, I'm going to share my thoughts. I thought the pacing was some of the best pacing that I've really seen in an anime, and I was very, very impressed by the way that it was paced. I've watched a lot of anime in my time. I've been watching anime for, really close to 20 years at this point. I've seen a lot, right? I've seen a lot of ways that people take this medium of weekly 30 to 20 minute episodic shows, and they try and tell their narrative to that kind of formula. But when I was watching Children of the Whales, I had to stop myself very, very frequently, almost every episode, and say to myself, this is not a film. This is not a 3-hour long film. This is an anime, an episodic series. I haven't just witnessed an hour and a half of plot. I've witnessed 15, 20 minutes of plot as, the episodes have gone on. And the pace of the narrative was so dramatic. It was so always moving, moving when it needed to, lingering when it absolutely needed to, lingering on moments of interpersonal emotion, lingering on moments of tragedy, moving through exciting scenes of combat and through lighthearted upbeats that would keep this, that would kind of buoy this story along on its path. And I knew this, the sad things were happening, the emotional beats that were being hit, on the track that a lot of anime goes down. And I knew what I was in for. I knew that there would be tragedy. I knew that a lot of awful things would sort of happen. I knew they would be grim. I knew that there would be gore. But what I was not suspecting were these, in my subjective opinion, pure moments of absolute humanity. Right? And when I say something like that, I guess what I mean is when you have a utopian story, and instead of talking about society, instead of talking about the hard sort of logic of things, instead of explaining, well, in this society, this is how we conserve resources, this is how we structure our social system, any of that wasn't what was important, wasn't what the mangaka or the writer that was involved in that project, it wasn't what they were interested in. I think Children of the Whales would set up these incredibly tragic scenarios. And I would think back to Madoka Magica, you know, the kind of hit of, 2011, 2012? And certainly I loved it at the time as well, you know, kind of like subverting and thinking about, you know, tragedy and emotion. It was kind of edgy and dark, and it was kind of different from what we had seen. And I think since then, it kind of, I don't think it started this trend, but it pushed along this kind of trajectory of these kind of grim, dark, edgy shows. And what I appreciated so much about Children of the Whales is that every time the characters would suffer this loss, or that they would hit a wall, they would look at each other, and they would look inside of themselves, and they would remain hopeful, and they would look at what they still had, and they would think about, okay, what can we do with what we have to keep going forward? I found this anime rides such this beautiful kind of wave of peaks and valleys. And it always remained hopeful. At every turn of conflict, the characters come together, they talk to each other, they are respectful, they're empathetic, and they are loving, and they find a way to move forward. And I appreciated that so much in this show. If I'm coming on to YouTube and I'm talking to you, telling you kind of my organic thoughts after I watched this show, what I thought, my impressions that I could give, and whether or not I think that you should watch the show as well, right? This kind of like social conversation that I can have with you as the viewer. I would have to say that I loved this show, right? I found so much worth. I found so much power. I found so much inspiration. I loved when the show was very real. I loved when the themes got dark, but it's things that I've felt before. It's things that I've recognized in my day-to-day life. And it's these characters that cope. When shit happens, it methodically shows how different characters cope with what is happening. It doesn't... I think a lot of shows have this formula of depressing things happen and then the character breaks. And it's almost like this kind of torture porn. You know, you love to see this character break. And I really was surprised when, you know, the thing would happen and characters weren't breaking. And I found that so refreshing, and I found that so inspiring, that these characters were coming together, they were coping, trying to figure out the situation. I'm reiterating these points because I'm a person that has dealt with anxiety. I'm a person that has dealt with depression. I have dealt with loss. I am a marginalized person living in the community that I'm living in. And my greatest strength as a human being is the ability to cope, right? And that's kind of, I think for anyone, that is kind of your greatest strength, but I think specifically for people that are marginalized and people that have to learn to cope with mental illness, that is a skill, and that is a power that I think is not talked about enough in media. And so, you know, and it could be that Children of the Whales was not in any way trying to kind of accomplish this, but I really think that it was. You know, my reading of the media that I've just watched is subjective. And so I'm going to make the points that I feel are valid. I mean, right? All of this is me trying to articulate to you organically how much I loved this show, how much I was blown away, how much I was surprised by this show. I was surprised at the way that it resonated with me. And I think for me personally, you know, I think people view media differently. They engage with media differently, but I think for me personally, I value media that I can resonate with. You know, I love things like Steven Universe. I love like the Marvel shows that are on Netflix. I love things that are psychological or that deal with interpersonal relationships, that articulate emotion and, you know, human beings going through situations and overcoming or triumphing or battling or, conflicting, because that is, I like my media personally to reflect the kind of human experience that I'm living in the real world, right? I want to learn from it, the media that I consume. I mean, I want it to inform and help to give me tools so that I can continue on in my life. That's kind of like how I view the media that I consume and where I place the value in that media. And so a show that can get me to sit here and my mind is flooded with so many thoughts that I want to talk about. It was such a beautiful journey. I kept thinking to myself, and I kept noticing while I was watching these episodes, girl, I kept thinking, like, I feel like I have this connection with the creators, and I think as a visual artist myself, it's very rare for me to view something and not see the value in it, because there are real people who worked and who sweat and who dreamed and who overcame and triumphed to create a piece of media. And that to me is powerful. They came together, they worked together, past their differences to kind of create this media for you, right? And of course, there's things like monetary gain. We live, a vast majority of the world is kind of under this capitalist kind of like thing. So, there's definitely the monetary incentive, but I think that's the world that we live in. And I think within that world, it makes genuine pieces of media shine to me. Right now in July, the summer season of 2018 has started, and I've watched some of these shows. And as I said before, I would say that it is hard for me to discredit media, because I think there's so much value. There are human beings with depth, with intellect and creativity that work to create media, and they all have value. But what I think, me as a viewer, as a consumer, media that I discredit or media that I watch or play some of, and then I decide I don't, what is this? I don't want to engage with this. I don't think this is worth my time. It's usually just things that aren't inspired. It's usually things where I can't see that spirit in it. You've given me this thing and I'm like, what is this? And I don't think that's to discredit, because I think, there's media that is kind of simplified and it's meant to kind of be, consumed. And, I'm not, I'm saying all these things also as like a YouTube Let's Player. Like, the media that I put out onto the internet is mainly just kind of like comfort and, you get to listen to a stream of consciousness. I haven't, crafted this elaborate thing, or at least, not yet in my kind of creative endeavors. So I don't discredit that at all, but when I guess like, and I love to articulate in circles, but what I'm saying is like, Children of the Whales, like, that was what stuck out to me. It was like, I was looking at this picture book, this hand-painted watercolor, this veil of a show, this anime, being displayed before me, and I could see through it, and I could see the human beings on the other side, right? I could see them in the characters. I could see them in the concepts that the show was trying to talk to me about. I could see the passion, and I could see, this show was shaking you and trying to remind you, be human, girl, sweetie. Like, it's so poignant. And of course, I don't live in Japan, but I find that a lot of anime, a lot of Japanese media seems to really carry the sentiment. Not all of it, but a lot of it carries this very deep and this almost desperate cry for, I'm stressed, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. And I think from my understanding of the way the Japanese society works, the kind of interpersonal, the kind of highly professional, the kind of society that, from what I understand it to be, has this it values kind of the assimilation. It values, the group, and it kind of shuns individuality, and it shuns difference in some sort of way. And certainly in Western society, it is that way as well. It's all about schooling, and it's all about, getting into a good college and getting into the workforce as fast as you can, as successfully as you can, make as much money as you can, have as much status and wealth and power as you can, and, have a partner and have ownership over them. And, it's all about, that sort of, and it's these bricks that have been built upon each other century after century. It's that kind of heteropatriarchal, system that has been reinforced for so many years. And so I'm always interested, and I'm always listening when I engage with media, and it has this desperate sentiment of, we're human beings, we just have to cry that out to you in this media, and take that and see what you can do with it, right? And that's what I also found with the show that it was trying to do, and that I found so powerful and moving, more so than the themes of, or than the plot of the show, than this character dying or that character or whatever. And through the show, showing intimately characters coping with loss, and coping, with their frustrations and their anger and their sadness. If there was a way that I could communicate to the creatives, to the writer, to the mangaka, to the visual, the auditory, all of that, the staff, that I hear it, and this meant so much to me. Your emotions, and the culmination of your thoughts and your emotion and your creative vision meant a lot to me. And I'm going to take everything that you have said to me, and I'm going to apply it, to my life, into my creative endeavors. This stranger, right? And so that is what I liked about Children of the Whales. I found all the characters to be pretty real, even in an anime which for me for a long time has been very difficult to find. I think the one show, if I can talk about it, if I can mention it briefly, that I've really found true human characters, Hex Sign, which again is kind of viewed as this lesser anime, but I think more unanimously people can agree with Cowboy Bebop, right? Shows that are giving me a character, and I see past the cell shading and the line art, and I see like a person, right? And I didn't quite get to that level with these characters. There were just so many of these characters that they were bringing to me, but they were acting as humans did. Horror acts of violence were happening and the characters were reacting. It wasn't, this sort of, I just stabbed you and I'm gonna yandere laugh at you, right? It was horrible things were happening in this society that hadn't dealt with violence. Were seeing these things and they didn't know what to do about it. And they had to learn to cope with these new situations and emotions that they probably haven't really at least at this severity felt before. And I was so compelled by that, and I felt a lot through seeing the way that they were just feeling all of these things and interpreting and digesting and unpacking them. And I really feel like that's, for the most part, what I have to say. I was surprised to find this anime on Netflix. It has a dub. It might be dubbed in a couple of different languages. It has subs in many different languages. I'm very thankful of how accessible this anime is, because I think if you've listened to anything that I've had to say or feel any sort of connection with my opinions and how I feel about the media that I consume, I would recommend this to you. I think it is really fantastic. I think it might be painful, and that is kind of like my warning to you, is that it deals with tragic themes, and that it deals with a lot of very heavy kind of things happening to these very good characters. But I also, if I'm going to give you that warning, I also have to give you the I guess I wouldn't say warning, but the promise that it is, in my opinion, also a very positive story. It is a story that really, hits those peaks and valleys in a way that I think creates an equilibrium. I would not say this is a depressing show for the most part. I found it to be a very triumphant show, and I know things like that are very subjective, and it depends, the way that we interpret media depends on where we are. And so, I think, like me being in a very positive place in my life, I would watch the show and see it very positively, but someone who is in a negative place in their life might view a lot of it as very tragic and depressing. And so for that, I can't prescribe that mileage for you individually. But I would say if you watch an episode, you get to that second episode. That second episode is going to tell you everything you need to know about the show. So you think about those, and this is my opinion. I don't know the consensus. I think someone was saying, after the fourth episode, it drops off. And I read that comment. I was like, sweetie, what the fuck are you talking about? But I think you'll know right away, sweetie. I knew the halfway through the first episode, in my taste, I was like, bitch, this is something that I don't want to put down. This is great. And I didn't put it down. So, I'm not really sure what else to say. This is one of my favorites. I was just blown away and surprised every episode, every scene, and maybe you'll disagree. Maybe you'll watch this and, you'll pick up and detect every single plot beat of it. But I was just very impressed. This is a very special show to me now, I think. And as an old anime fan that has been having a hard time being disillusioned to where anime seems to be going, I felt hopeful. I feel hopeful that, this work is kind of, it inhabits space in our current kind of like zeitgeist, that it will hopefully kind of like help us move in this kind of trajectory. I so long for, the days of 90s and kind of early 2000s shows, the Evangelion, the Cowboy Bebop, the Ghost in the Shell, the Revolutionary Girl, I can keep going. All of these fantastic, these just rich and engaging shows, and I'm kind of waiting for the pendulum to swing back, after this sort of kind of like, it's almost this industrial boom of anime culture, and what kind of this anime culture has become in this kind of machine and its commodities. And I don't think it's negative or positive, but it's just, this is the current flavor that we're working with. And so I'm interested to see where anime goes next, I guess, where it will change. At least that's how this anime is making me feel and how I think. So thank you for listening. And I hope you watch some good anime that makes you feel something, even if it's not this one. And you can tell me shows that you like in the comments, and maybe I'll check them out. If you get any sort of sense for what I like, you can kind of give me recommendations. I'm always looking, and I'm always interested in going back to things that I've missed. I've seen a lot of anime, but maybe you can introduce me to something, and I'd love that. So yeah, have a good day, sweetie.